Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are pleased to have you joining us today for this conversation with our friends from Episcopal Relief and Development. It's wonderful to be partnering with them to share about the work that's going on in supporting vulnerable communities. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Episcopal Parish Network, and we are thrilled to have this session happening. And also ERD will be with us at our Jacksonville conference, March 8th through the 11th. Hope that all of you all will make plans to be there as well. It's going to be an amazing time with some really incredible folks like Archbishop Thabo of South Africa and John Meacham, the historian and author. So without further ado, we're going to get into this conversation, and I'm going to hand it off to Tamara. Please do remember to put your questions and comments into the chat. And if you have a minute, just tell us where you are dialing in from today. Put your name and parish or location into the chat as well, and that'll give them a sense of who's listening in. So thanks again for joining. Tamara, off to you. And thank you and Nathan for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. We are so grateful for your presence and for your attention during this time. If you are making lunch, or you are getting ready for bed, or you are in the middle of your day, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, thank you so much for taking the time. The first thing I love to do, yes, please, as Joe said, just put your name, where you are in the world, where you are in this country. I'm coming to you from my 6th floor apartment in Brooklyn, New York. It is not a walk-up. And I'm very grateful to have one of our partners on the call. Nathan, can you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Nathan Ives. I'm the rector of St. Peter's San Pedro Episcopal Church in Salem, Massachusetts. And I've been here 5 years, and it's a dynamic, amazing place. And I'm really, really thrilled to be here with you today.
Thank you, Reverend Ives. As per most workshops, I will share my screen. I will also say, this is not going to be a regular PowerPoint. I hope that you will be interactive in the chat, and that this won't just be me talking to Reverend Ives for the next 30, 40 minutes. So big questions. Everyone can see my PowerPoint, hopefully, and Joe will let me know if there's a problem. All right, let's get started. So you all, I think, are here to talk about partnering with vulnerable communities and Episcopal Relief and Development as a beginning place. Again, if you can just put a word about how you are feeling today, just one word. Great. I will let you all do that. So quick background: Episcopal Relief and Development is the compassionate response of the Episcopal Church to human need throughout the world. You can go to our website, episcopalrelief.org, to find out more. And coincidences of coincidences, today is our founding day. I love happy and privileged. I love that. I love hopeful, I see in the chat. Interested, and Episcopal Relief and Development was founded by Bishop, COVID brain has me losing myself. So Bishop Jones, Paul Jones, in December 6th is our founding day. And it was founded really as a relief organization that was responding to the needs of World War II and folks fleeing from Nazi Germany and Nazi occupied territories. And the DNA of us responding to human need continues to be a thread throughout our history, while it has changed over time. It is important to note that it is about Bishop Paul Jones, it is about the folks that found it, but really what I want to thank is all of you, and I want to thank our staff. And the best way I can do that is to play just a quick video of what we believe as an organization.
We believe.
We believe.
We believe. We believe our life-giving, loving, liberating God gives all, gathers all, and draws all towards shared wholeness with one another and the concerns of those struggling with poverty, disaster, and disease.
We believe.
We believe in faith's power to guide us in honoring the dignity of every human being and in building bridges between and beyond ourselves to the world.
We believe.
We believe bridges built with local presence and assets can transform individuals, communities, and systems for the better.
We believe.
We believe systemic change requires collaborative, just, and reconciling leadership.
We believe.
We believe we are called to right the wrongs and sins of the past, even as we strive to repent of those sins and any we continue to commit.
We believe.
We believe the present state of the world does not fulfill the dream God intends for us.
We believe.
We believe in urgent, bold, and inclusive humanitarian action that reaches the most vulnerable, builds toward tomorrow, and fosters and spreads hope and healing.
We believe. For lasting change.
And so what we also believe is that we should stand, faith is one of our belief systems. And where I'd like to start is just a quick little Bible study. I'm going to read it fast because we're not going to spend a lot of time, because one of your homework items, yes, I'm giving you homework. I am an educator in my heart. And so your homework starts here. You should do this Bible study for real in your congregation the next time you have the chance. This is your first step in building your conversation about how to get connected and partner with vulnerable communities. And so the story goes that a wife of a member of the company of prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. But a creditor has come to take my 2 children as slaves." Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She answered, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." He said, "Go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels and not just a few. Then go in and shut the door behind you and your children and start pouring into all these vessels. When each is full, set it aside." So she left him and shut the door behind her and her children. They kept bringing vessels to her and she kept pouring. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." But he said to her, "There are no more." Then the oil stopped flowing. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your children can live on the rest." What I love about this reading is that it really highlights the work that we do with partners and the work that we ask communities to do with each other. We ask communities to say, what do you have in the house? What are your gifts? What are your assets? What do you already feel connected to? Who do you already know that needs support? And sometimes probably we wouldn't ask her to go out and buy vessels. We might provide a small grant for that woman to go out and get get vessels and maybe pay her neighbors a little bit so that her neighbors got a little bit of the economic growth of this process, and then to sell and live on the rest. That she already has gifts and capacities inside of her, even if she does not see them. And so the question is, how do we show up in communities and notice what God is already up to, how God is already being present, even with people that we might see as having lack or needing something? And so the way that we would do this Bible study is, going to come back to this, is called FAMA. So facts. We walk through the story. What was the story about? The next step is association. So how do we feel connected to this story? So we would invite each other to tell stories about when we have been Elisha, when we have been the widow, when we have been the neighbor, and then we make meaning out of those stories. And then we invite each other to a place of action. And so I want to ask folks to, in the chat, who is vulnerable in that story? I'm gonna let y'all answer that question in the chat. Reverend Ives, I'll pick on you for a little bit. Who do you see as vulnerable in that story?
Well, I think of Elisha as a person that doesn't have anything but a jar of oil that's got, and looks at it as zero, as being really what we would say in local parlance, wicked vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the widow who's about to lose her children is definitely vulnerable. And even in this picture, why I chose it is we see a person crying and being hugged by seemingly another person. And the question is, who is actually vulnerable? The person with the bottle, the person who is dealing with the lack of income might be the vulnerable person. The person, this is a disaster picture of a response that happened in the Keys after a hurricane. But in so many ways, all of us are vulnerable. So I want us to think about vulnerability in a couple of ways. There's systemic historic vulnerability, right? There are things like racism, sexism, homophobia, gender stuff, like all kinds of systemic issues that make communities vulnerable. But then there are also institutional vulnerabilities, ways that are right now the church feels very vulnerable, right? After going through this lockdown period and coming back in person, it doesn't look the way that it did before, and it is making us feel quite vulnerable. Particular communities can be seen as vulnerable, and then particular individuals can be seen as vulnerable. But the reality is that vulnerability is so contextual. So what was vulnerable before, so the widow may have started out in that story as vulnerable, but by the end, she's actually quite resilient. She's able to sustain herself and her children, even as a widow, even with children. So vulnerability is not a be-all, end-all, one size fits all way of thinking about vulnerability. I often, if you read research about disasters, folks will tell the story of Vietnamese populations after Hurricane Katrina, who had a rapid capacity to respond because they were seen as vulnerable community. They were immigrant population, they were low income, but they all knew each other and they were all connected. And so after Katrina, they were able to work together as a community to rebuild their neighborhoods and to respond. It doesn't mean that they didn't need outside help or that they didn't need other resources to help them through the process. But because they were connected, because they knew each other, they were able to utilize the resources within their community to respond to the needs of their community. And what we call that is asset-based community development. This is the thing that underpins all of our work and our ministry as Episcopal Relief. What is the gift of the community that the community can utilize to respond to the need of that community? We can talk about a lot of ways of doing this work, but this is the heart of it. What is God already up to in your community, wherever you are right now? So if I think about my own community, I live in Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York. It is a predominantly immigrant community in Brooklyn, variety of economics. I think the median income is anywhere from $55,000 to $150,000. If you know New York City, that actually is not a lot of money, even though it's a lot of money. And so there's ways to think about this community as a place that has poverty, a place that has food deserts, a place that has crime. But there's another way to think about this community, and it is a place that has hospitals, after school programs, families that love each other, lots of languages, lots of diversity. And actually, we're not really a food desert. We actually have lots of great food in this community. And so how can we walk around our neighborhoods and see what God is already up to? And the homework number 2 is this. You're going to think about your community in 5 different ways, how you think about your assets. First one, people. Who are the folks in your community? Do you know your neighbors? All of your neighbors, not just the neighbors you like, but who is that person that sleeps on the church steps? Who is the person that knocks on your door every week to ask for money? Who are the people that come to events at your church? Who are the people that rent your space? Who are the organizations that you partner with? Who are those people? The property, the physical plant, the grass outside, the yard, the cul-de-sac, the building, the bathroom space. I remember during pandemic, one of the biggest things I wanted community folks to do is to use their property as public bathrooms, because a lot of unhoused people in our neighborhood did not have access to public bathrooms. They had all been shut down. And so they were utilizing places that they probably are not healthy as public bathroom space. So how could we use our property to respond to that human need? Programs, what organizations are using your spaces? I went to a church where there was a dance group that used our space, Boy Scouts, AA, NA, the program you have with the folks across the street, whoever they are, the back to school bags you make. What are all the programs you do? Purse, how much money do you have or not have? How much money do you have access to? Maybe you have someone who's really great grant writer and actually knows how to get you millions of dollars by writing good grants. So what's your purse? And then the last piece I think is the most important. And that's really the focus of this ABCD work. It's what is your posture? And what I will say about posture is it's how we show up. So what is your community inclined to do? And I think that Reverend Ives is a great example, and his church is a great example of posture. They're a bilingual congregation. Can you talk a little bit more about your congregation, Nathan?
Sure. A very, very special place with folks from a variety of backgrounds, but a large immigrant population, largely Dominican, that has been in the country for, their first generation in the country, with second generation kids coming up the line that are fully bilingual, but the parents aren't necessarily, but very much struggling with economic factors. We're talking prior to COVID. They were edgy at best, on the edge. And the ice was thin. And
you also have some English-speaking folks in your congregation as well, right?
We do. We have a longstanding group of folks that have been here. We have folks that have been here as kids, and they're now in their 80s. And so there's, and it's oddly roughly 50-50. So the communities are almost equal inside, although that's changing now. There's been a shift since COVID, and the Latino congregation is growing.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more, though, about how I think this is good for people to know, how you think about your vestry and how you all have formed your vestry
Sure.
to represent that.
Well, it has to do with reconciling the power and effect and historic imprint of privilege. And so when I came here, you could clearly see that there had been ongoing struggles with privilege and how that and that privilege had won in many cases. So one of the things that we've really worked hard at is to stress that there needs to be power sharing across the board. And so the vestry now is 50% Latino and 50% Anglo. The upper, the officers of the vestry, 50% Anglo, 50% Latino, so that we can really have a partner sharing, a sharing going on there, and a partnership for everybody.
Yeah, and I think what I love about your story and how you built that is that the folks who have always been there, maybe some of them do, but it sounds like they recognized that there was space for all of it, right? You didn't just have to have one or the other, that there was space for a broader understanding of what God's community looks like.
That's exactly right. And it wasn't like I turned on a light, and all of a sudden that it was, we turned on a light. We started to recognize exactly how we knew that we weren't reflecting the community that surrounded us, or let alone the community that was worshiping in the parish. And so it was just a beautiful dawning of what we needed to do. And it became relatively easy to do in the end. It just, you needed to have the effort and the inspiration to do it, and just make it happen. Have that be our intention.
Can you talk a little bit about what the pandemic was like for your community and how it impacted?
Yeah, before the pandemic hit, as I say, it was edgy at best, right? There were folks with real need, but they were managing to the degree that they could. A lot of single parents, and then the pandemic hit, and just everything went asunder. So it was hard enough, everybody was experiencing how to handle kids being homeschooled, so to speak, with the Zoom conversations and stuff going on for the kids. How do they keep a job and all these things, and the sickness that was going. But it was taking the pandemic took the fragility that already existed amongst the folks largely here, and just sunk it, right? There was no longer any ice. It was now all water, and you darn well better tread quickly. So that was a huge breach for folks, and it continues today. I had 2 clients in today. At some point, there's a line out the door for folks that are waiting to just talk and kind of share their story and figure out where can we work together.
And can you talk about what you did to make them feel comfortable enough to come to your door?
Well, a lot of it we had done this earlier before COVID, but to be out into the community was one thing, so that we would just be there and hang out in the park and have a lot of community conversations.
So can we just pause right there?
Sure.
You said you hung out in the park. Were you trying to recruit people to come to Sunday morning worship?
No, it was just, we're trying to talk, just have conversations. No, actually, that was never our motivation. And it's still to this day, it's never our motivation. They'll ask me, gosh, I've had many say, you appear to be walking the walk here. So, what's your service time and such? And I'll tell them and so forth, but that's not the aim, of course. The aim is to meet them where they are and what's God calling us to do in this moment, and let's see where we can go.
I want to probe a little bit, because sometimes I think when we talk to congregations and churches, they want like a magic bullet for how to get connected to vulnerability or to vulnerable communities, and how they can partner to do ministry. But it sounds like that's not the answer. So can you talk a little bit, or maybe you have a story of somebody you've been able to connect with through your community partnerships, oh, I love this. In the chat, I see more hearts are won by playing in the park or at our coffee shop. And I think that's true. Yeah. Yep. So maybe you have a story of a community or a person that you connected with, obviously keeping their privacy, but
yeah. Well, it's on a variety of levels. I'll preface it by just saying that, at our particular church, it's an 1833 building, so it's wicked old. There are 2 enormous doors up there that are the front doors, and keeping those doors open. And I know they're locked right now because we're not in there and so forth. But I mean, keeping the capacity of the church open to the community more than it's closed has been absolutely essential. It is the grease that has allowed folks to move freely and effortlessly in and out. And we do that by just starting somewhere. Having, for instance, long before I got here was a years-long effort to give out coats, winter coats in the wintertime on a Saturday, first Saturday of the month. It's just tradition here to do that. People know that. So they come in droves from everywhere to get their coats on those cold Saturdays. So, and that has led to other conversations. So, but in particular, being adaptable to the circumstances. So we had to speak Spanish, and not many people did here before. So I'm bilingual. The Latinos certainly are bilingual by and large. And so it's the spreading of sharing of information about what we're doing. It's got to go out in the language, the vernacular, that's that's where the needs are. And that has made a huge difference.
It sounds like that vernacular is both wicked and also so very Massachusetts and also Spanish, but also the Spanish of the people that are in that community, right? Because it could be a variety of ways of being vernacular. So I think about our partners in Western Louisiana, and having one of the folks that runs that disaster response program definitely speaks in the vernacular of the people in her community. And so that was a great entryway. She wasn't speaking kind of a foreign language when approaching. I even think of another woman who runs it and is the bishop's wife and also does some ministry outreach programming. And she's not going to speak the way she would she doesn't speak Tennessee. I think Tennessee was where they were for a while. She speaks Louisiana when she's in Louisiana. So I hear you saying, one, you had a regular way of reaching out to community, just a random event. And then the second way was that you spread the word through the language of your own people.
And I would say that the folks appreciate so much any effort that is made to speak to them where they're at. So in their language, in terms they can understand, and even if it's broken Spanish, so to speak, they understand the effort that you're taking to do it, and they're deeply appreciative of it.
Yeah. I see in the chat there was a question specifically about, was this you going in the park? Who's going in the park? How?
Yeah, it was me initially, and I'm an obvious target, so I've got the collar and I'm standing out there. But when you're in the community, for instance, I go to the Latino quarter and I hang out in the park there. And the Latinos that are part of this congregation come over and say, "What are you doing? This is awesome. Hey, what's going on?" And so they sit and talk. And the next thing you know, 2 or 3 of their friends come over, and it's a little group, and we're just talking, about the news of the day or what's going on or the weather or whatever it is. And so it is. It's just, or it might be me. Parishioners know that I go there. I announce it in the bulletin. It says I'm going to be out in the park, and so they'll meet me there. And so it's us walking together, and they want to show me their neighborhood. And tell me a story about this or that or this one or that one. And so,
yeah, I love that. Because sometimes it can be hard to get parishioners to do another thing. Mm-hmm. To say, like, we're going to go in the park and chat with the community. But if it's just, can you show me your neighborhood? And I already have a connection to people who will sit in kind of that historical vulnerability group or that systemic vulnerability group in my congregation, so they take me on a walk. I could imagine at my mom's church, there was a guy named, it's not Charles, I can't remember his name, but he's a homeless dude. But because he is an unhoused person in the neighborhood that felt comfortable, like what would a walk through the neighborhood with that guy look like?
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. And here I am, I'm just an average white priest, right? And they don't necessarily know I speak Spanish, so they're not necessarily inclined to come up and engage me. They'll be oddity, say, what's he doing here? But then when they find that I can speak their language and we can talk, and it's just, and you listen. The thing is, you got to listen, and because a lot of the needs come up, and that's what shaped what we've been doing, is that listening has led to partnerships. So.
And so I just want to take a pause and go back a little bit. I won't do my presentation, but because I'm going to probably pick on Nathan in a second. But I see a moment about inviting, in the chat, someone said, invite county emergency management director or whatever the title is of emergency management people. And I think that is super important to get connected to the institutional emergency management systems. I definitely want to affirm that. And then the second part that I want to affirm is a little bit of the work that Reverend Ives has talked about, that Nathan has talked about, is how do we get connected not just to the institutional pieces, because sometimes the folks that the church is best positioned to help fall outside of that space. So we want to be connected to the institutional pieces, the emergency management system, so that they know that we are a resource. and be connected to the people. For example, in your community, a lot of your folks have documentation, but some of them don't, I would imagine.
Correct.
And for them, it is dangerous to be connected to those emergency management systems. So even as we are being connected to institutional spaces, how can we keep our folks safe, particularly if they're in vulnerable populations who don't feel safe being connected to those institutional spaces?
Yeah. Well, again, it's where you spend your time. So during the Trump administration, I spent a lot of time up at ICE headquarters advocating for people for staying in the country, not being deported. And it was really touch and go. It was aggressive work in that you were pushed back on aggressively by the folks that were from ICE and everything. And it was not comfortable work. And yet the word spread about that work, and the folks knew, okay, there's someone I can talk to because they're advocating for other people. Maybe they'll advocate for me. And so it has, and word travels about what's going on. Word has traveled when we've helped with the coats or when we've helped with financial assistance, the word spread. And I'm not advertising this program at all. And we've had hundreds of clients, hundreds of them. And it's everybody else telling everybody else about, all right, if you want to explore an opportunity, there's a place that you can go to a resource and such.
Yeah, it's a super delicate space, right? Because I'm sure there are folks in your congregation who may agree with the deportations and who may maybe they won't say it out loud. Yeah. But how do we still stand with people as they're going through that process, right? Like even if you politically are not aligned in that way, how do you hold that space in between? And I think that's the place that church is really called to stand for. I think about our program in Texas that is working with folks coming through the border as asylum seekers. And a lot of those folks in Texas were then going to, particularly those from African countries, Angola and DRC Congo, were going up to Maine because Maine was one of the few places they could actually get social services while still seeking asylum. A lot of folks, while they seek asylum, can't technically work or can't
right. That's
get government services. But in Maine, they were able to access those services. And so a lot of folks ended up in Portland, Maine, in the middle of winter. And what's beautiful is we know the folks in Maine and we know the folks in Texas, and we can connect those resources so that they can talk to each other, right? Like that's such a beautiful moment where they can say, hey, a lot of folks are getting released right now from this particular group. They might be headed to you. Or this is what's going on in Maine. And our partner in Texas said, I know a lawyer that might be able to support. A lot of COVID money was used to support folks who were seeking asylum and have housing, because a lot of them were unhoused. Mm-hmm. And so now that COVID money is gone from the federal government, folks are about to be kicked out of that housing. Yeah. And so some folks have lost their asylum status because of very small rules, very short rules. And so the folks in Texas were like, I think I know a lawyer that might be able to help with the folks in Maine. And there's a way that we all are able to network and support each other, even though we are so far apart because of this Episcopal network of people who are trying to respond to human need. Yeah.
Well, that's the case in point with us and how we collaborated.
Yeah.
To the point about the community emergency disaster relief kind of folks, very important. But I must say that we're talking about, that might be important in the 100-year flood when people's basements get flooded or relatively speaking, people's lives are altered because of that. We're talking now a 500-year flood. This was beyond the capacity of what in Massachusetts is called DTA or welfare, or the capacity of other existing institutions. And quite frankly, the people were so broken by what was happening, and they were suffering through COVID, and one illness meant that they couldn't work for 3 weeks because it went through the whole family, and then there was no money for rent. And they couldn't find the places, or were desperate for the places where they could go, where there wouldn't be rigmarole to get the money they needed. Mm-hmm. That's where I think we found our sweet spot. We weren't handing out money on the street corner and just say, hey, just take it. we did our casework, but we made sure that it was humanitarian casework in the sense that it wasn't going to make them suffer to get it.
Yeah, can you talk about that grant? So we were able to partner and do a grant with you all to support folks in the community as a part of your COVID response and pandemic response. Can you walk us through what happened, even a story of a family that you may have supported?
Oh, there's so many. There's so many. And I mean, these are not weak people. These are not people that, don't have their wits about them or anything like that. I want you to envision amazingly strong, largely women that are single moms and have it together, but are like, man, my thread has run out. How do I sew without thread? So this beautiful partnership kind of came back up a little bit. There were $200 in my account for the Rector's Discretionary Fund before COVID. And then money just miraculously started to flow in, and we would give it immediately out, and word would travel and more money would come in. And it was this engine that started to happen. And the partnership with Episcopal Relief and Development extended that tremendously at one of the deepest parts of the pandemic. And we were able to so we're talking, overall, it's been since the beginning of COVID, approaching $50,000 that we've given out as a parish, that we didn't have this money. This isn't something that we had in the bank. So this is the jar of oil. This is the jar of oil.
Yeah.
This is it. That's a beautiful, beautiful passage because it describes it perfectly. And it continues to this day. The money has ebbed and flowed in there, but the needs have not. And so we continue to see, people just keep bringing me jars. So it's been tremendous. In a particular family, they'll come in and, largely it's focused on rental assistance. Sometimes it's utilities. But I make people, a lot of people want to do it over the phone. Nope, they got to come in and they got to see me. And we sit down and we talk. And it may be that they're not vaccinated and we're talking outside, or they are vaccinated and there's a great, we've done it, every shade of COVID has been represented here in the masks and the double masks, and now not so much masks as long as people are vaccinated. But we've met, we've talked about what their needs are, or if they're actually suffering in COVID that moment, it is done over the phone. And a beautiful thing that Tamara helped us with was with Cash App, to allow us to make the immediacy of this real for people. So I would actually be talking with someone. We have a couch here where I talk with people I'm across from them, they're sitting on the couch, and we're working things out, and we'll have spoken that they have Cash App. And the next thing they know, the money I've decided to give, given on the situation they've told me about, is in their account. And they can't believe it. There's been no form to sign. There's nothing. It's just, we understand it. Now, I've done my documentation and I've noted their name and address and who I've helped and how much and why and what's the family composition and all of that. And that's just my training. I was a caseworker when I first started employment out of college. But it's truly been an amazing journey, of a dynamic journey of Christian love in this respect.
So if folks in the chat can you heard Reverend Ives Nathan talk about his gifts as a person, his gifts of his community, and the ways that they have responded. Can you all just, as an exercise, as you think about those people, property, programs, purse, and posture, begin to write what gifts you heard in the story that Nathan has been telling us in this time. And while you all do that, I love this suggestion in the chat about translation, that having resources in multiple languages is often a great way to link kind of those institutional systems to the local community. I noticed the other day, just even in my neighborhood, there are a lot of Haitians in my community, and the poster was in Creole, in Haitian Creole, as much as it was in French and English and other languages that normally happen. And I think that translation piece is super helpful. I'm gonna pause for a second and open it up if there are questions or other comments in the chat about what we have spoken about so far. Joe's gonna say, sent out an announcement for you all. I don't see other questions, so I'm gonna pause. and just I want to get this on record. So can you talk about the process of doing Cash App? This has been a new endeavor for us. Is doing this cash assistance. They call it CVA, cash voucher assistance. We've always kind of done gift cards, so we've been doing that kind of programming for a while. But that Cash App thing, what was the hesitancy? And then a little bit about the technical piece, and then we're gonna wrap up, because I think this is a super important piece to share with folks.
Yeah, I must say it was intimidating at first because I wasn't a user of Cash App. I did Venmo and stuff personally, so I knew the general gist of it. But you have to wrap it around, the business manual for church affairs and all that kind of stuff. And so, but what we did was to pair the Cash App with the rector's discretionary fund, so that there was one person through whom all the relief was being centered, and it was already the account that was used for that purpose. And Cash App is really cool because it gives you a summary. You know who you helped. There's a list there of the people you did and what amounts and on what day and so forth. So there's a track record, and it was very immediate. And I got to say, almost to a person, everybody had it. So you talk about joining the vernacular. You were now swimming in the same stream they were swimming in, and we're able to operate in that environment. So logistically, once we just set up, do the mechanics, and it was a morning, right? We were all set, and so I've used it now. It's almost an avenue of choice when I'm working with folks to do that. And sometimes, there may be a reason, because up to now it was a mind shift though, because I used to pay only the landlord, or I would buy the groceries, or a client wasn't getting the money in kind directly. You gave me that confidence to say, listen, we believe that there's a real value in entrusting the funds to the person to get it into the economy quickly and help them get through whatever they're dealing with right then. And that made a huge difference. And it was deeply, deeply appreciated.
And I think that shift to human dignity says that the person has a capacity to do with their funds what they need to do with the funds. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong here, so I might be setting myself up for failure, is that if the folks that came to ask for rent money that you may have given the 500 or 250 to get boost over or whatever, did not come back and say, oh, I didn't pay rent, so can I get some more money?
Never one. I mean, I've had people come back before, but it's because they paid it, and COVID happened again. And now the COVID came back, went through the house again, and they were out of another month's worth of work. But I do, and the casework I did was the verification. I'm calling places to verify this is the situation and such, and they know I'm doing it. And it's not I don't trust you. It's just this is what I do. Because it needs to be above board. There needs to be a paper trail, and you helped me. I mean, I was already doing it, but we had a financial limit to each person. Some of I got other grants earlier on in COVID that as well, and they had a grant. So you follow the stipulations of every person who gives you money, and but then I have a whole bunch of people that just give money to the rector's discretionary fund out of course, and don't, with no strings attached. Just do what we know you're going to do the right thing with this, and so you can. But still, I would adhere to I would make it fair. So what I was doing to you, I was doing to everybody else. And, there were some extenuating circumstances. The tragedies are just awful, awful tragedies. And, but you do the best that you can in the moment.
So there was a question about the diocesan role in your program. So I will say this from the Episcopal Relief and Development standpoint. We don't often work directly with a congregation. We work with the diocese to think about the larger need. And then based on that, the diocese knows where kind of need is in their diocese, and then connects folks to places that are able to implement certain kinds of programs that would align with Episcopal Relief and Development grant. And so that is how I got connected to the congregation. But are there other ways that the diocese has supported you in this work?
Well, that in and of itself was tremendous. And again, it spoke to or speaks to the conversational nature of ministry, right? If your ministry is a conversation wherever you go, it happened to be a conversation with a canon of the ordinary who said, he was listening, he's always listening. And the next thing I know, he said, I think you might want to have a good conversation with Tamara. Could give her a call. So boom, and the money did flow right through them because you paid them, they paid us, and then we paid the bills for folks directly out. And so that was so important. And there's a part of that question in there. So we're a particular parish among others that for the Latino ministries that does receive some diocesan support for operations, and but this was above and beyond that. This was beyond, because these resources, we're talking 40 grand was far out. So I think our outreach budget was $3,000 for the year, and we've been giving out money well beyond that. So and that's just from folks writing checks who know of us, and it's or other congregations that know what we're doing stuff, and they send a check. And so
yeah, I see another question. I just want to make sure that I'm reading it. Guys, staring at a screen and turning 40. I'm just going to put on my glasses. We have a new affordable housing complex right next to our condo where 40 homeless men and women will be moving in from local prisons and from the street to their first permanent home. That's exciting. As a community, we have bought each person 2 pairs of heavy socks and a card with a message of welcome to the community. I think that's an awesome way to introduce the church to folks in that new affordable housing unit, and also maybe just like have coffee hour outside or something, as a welcome coffee to your neighbors and see what's up. Reverend Ives, what other things would you suggest at this congregation?
Well, it's funny. We have a couple here that's a remarkable couple that came up with the idea. They knew, much of what I do during the week comes out in a sermon, right? Mm-hmm. And so they'll know what I'm up to. And because I'm, in many cases, they're working or whatever. And so I'm their hands and their eyes and their feet on the ground sometimes. Well, the next thing I know, in comes this box filled with Ziploc, like a freezer bag. And each one's the same, although there's 50% of men for men and 50% of women. And they term them bags of love. And there's deodorant and feminine products and stuff, hats, gloves, $5, and some of the NAB cookies and crackers and stuff in each one of these bags. And there were like 50 bags, and they said, just give these out. So that's what we do, because the homeless would come over. And it's kind of like we're a zoo, and we've taken the cage doors off. We still have the animals a safe distance from everybody, but they can get closer. And so the church, they're not feeling afraid to come to the church. Not that people were really afraid, but just uncomfortable or awkward or weird. They are easily approaching and feeling comfortable getting close here. And they know that they will at least be listened to. And so these bags have been a tremendous difference to folks. It's not much. I mean, gosh, I think combined thing might be $20 a bag, if that. And they were buying stuff in bulk from the dollar store and things like that. But man, the smile they put on faces, and they made a difference. Mm-hmm. And and that's easy,
I'm also thinking about this as a disaster response moment. So I would also suggest, Marnie, to think about who's the management company for this building. So how can you get connected to the folks that will know the folks, who's going to be the super, who's going to be the person that knows all the people's stories. It might be hard to get to know all the people that will live in this condo unit, but who would know what they need and who would be kind of the default priest or default pastor for that space. How do you get connected to that person? I say this because this is how folks responded in Western Louisiana. A bunch of folks left Diocese of Louisiana, New Orleans. I can't remember what hurricane it was because there have been way too many. And they went over to the Diocese of Western Louisiana, and a lot of folks were living in mass shelters there. The church, because of its relationship, when I say the church, the diocesan relationship with emergency management systems, was able to get to know the folks running the shelter. Because of COVID, you couldn't go in and do ministry as per usual, where folks walk around shelters and get to know families. But folks they compiled the needs of the place, and then the diocese just bought what people needed. And then they found out the day that they were going to go to Walmart so that they could give people gift cards on that day so folks could buy what they actually needed for themselves. And they didn't judge people for what they needed. They gave them exactly what they needed. If it's Diet Coke or I don't know, whatever candy, Haribo jelly beans, that's what they bought people. And so knowing the system, and this goes back to that earlier comment about systems, was able to give them access to understand what populations needed who were displaced because of this hurricane. And then that turned into a bigger relationship as longer term needs became present.
We're a big believer in what we'd term village coffee, in the sense that, you know, the whole concept of it takes a village, right? We're all a village, even as large as this community might be. It's all little tiny villages, one on top of the other. And the minute you do what that parish has just done, of reaching out to a housing unit like that, you begin to thaw this enormous tip of the iceberg, and with the love that you share. And then there's no, eventually, just by listening and dialogue, there is no longer an iceberg there, and there's just community. And that village is off to a great start. So it's really cool what can be done.
Yeah, Marnie says that they've been coordinating all along and to assuage the fears of their neighbors, and being that in-between space between the vulnerable folks moving in and the neighborhood that might be afraid of the fact that these folks are moving in. So I really love that I love this. What I'm learning from this conversation with you is how the church can be a bridge. Like, we're not the land of this or that, but we become a land of maybe all of us have something to contribute together. And it becomes the centering space for connection between all kinds of populations of people. And it makes what might have become a vulnerable community in terms of a church with elderly folks who didn't know what was going to happen to the building, didn't know what was going to happen next in the ministry, maybe shrinking average Sunday attendance to a thriving, multicultural, multi-generational, multilingual space that could respond to the needs of all kinds of neighbors and be seen as a beacon of hope in the community. And I just really love all of that. So if folks are wondering what we do as Episcopal Relief and Development, I sit in my house and I talk to folks like Nathan and all kinds of people, folks like, it sounds like Marnie, and all kinds of people throughout the Episcopal and Anglican communion who have a dream about how they can serve their community. And then we try to walk with them as they do that. So that's our spiel. And unless there are other comments or questions, I think that's all I have for you all. So hopefully that was helpful. I do have one last, oh, thanks, Joe. I have one last homework assignment. So there's I'll send folks I'll give Nathan access to these slides. So your homework is to do the FAMA Bible study, 2 Kings Bible study. There's also a resource on our website that does gifts and needs activity. It allows you to describe the gifts of your church and then think about the needs that might be present in the community after disaster. And then particularly thinking about what vulnerable populations might need, not just generic needs. And then we invite you to do that gifts and needs activity with other partners in your neighborhood. And then the other one, I will just echo Nathan's, sit in a park somewhere or a coffee shop and get to know your neighbors. Who are your neighbors? And then the last one is Call to Transformation, calltotransformation.org, which walks you through the asset-based community development approach that you can do in your neighborhood. So whatever it is, pray, think, study, do something is the invitation. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Nathan, I'll let you have the last word.
Well, thank you. God bless you all. This is so much fun work to do it together. And I think we enrich it by the way we join together and partner. So wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.